Hello everyone, welcome back. Today is another requested episode. This is one for our emotion series, and so we will be tackling jealousy. Speaking of, we are so jealous of other podcasts with more ratings and reviews, so if you all love our show, please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing on Apple Podcasts. We would greatly, greatly appreciate it. But for now, we'll dive into the episode. So, Kibby, can you tell us what jealousy is?
Jealousy is an emotion. It's interesting because we got this as a request. So I don't think of jealousy as often in mental health settings, but delving into the literature actually is pretty important, especially for relationship health and well-being. So jealousy in itself is an emotion that comes up when we feel like an important resource of ours is being taken away from us, right? So if you see a kid playing with toys and another kid comes and takes the toys, like that kid's going to get some jealousy and want to get their toys back, right? So that most of the time we talk about this in romantic relationships. If you feel like your relationship is being threatened by being taken away, right? Your partner is flirting with someone else, or you're afraid of infidelity. That's often where we see pathological jealousy. So, and that could, in the literature, they talk about morbid jealousy as the maladaptive jealousy, like a jealousy that takes like a really unhealthy form where there's a lot of controlling behaviors, a lot of aggression, sometimes violence, compensatory checking, like checking their whereabouts, their emails, social media, and a lot of threatening behaviors. So, and usually the person who really suffers from jealousy is not necessarily the person who feels jealousy, but it's the other partner. And so that's when usually people come into therapy, is like when the jealous of partner is feeling so much distress and they feel like it's getting in the way of their relationship.
Yes, I can attest to that. I do quickly want to contrast it with envy, because the two terms are conflated really frequently, and I do this all the time as well. I always forget the difference, but envy is a feeling of discontent or resentful longing aroused by someone else's possessions, qualities, or luck. So while you might be envious of somebody else's large house, great car, beautiful family, whereas if you're feeling jealous, it's about a threat to or perceived threat to your relationship. So you might be jealous, for instance, of like your husband's new female work colleague or something like that, because you're worried that she will potentially cause a threat to your relationship and take your relationship away from you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point, Jacqueline, because I think people often say, oh, I feel envious or I feel jealous, and they do that interchangeably. But as you're saying, jealousy is almost kind of like a threat of something of your own being taken away, whereas envy is like wanting someone else's stuff, right?
Yeah. I can say I think I'm high in envy and very low in jealousy. Mm-hmm. So there definitely can be big differences between this. And it really has to do with, it has to do with attachment style, with gender, with personality traits. So I did some research kind of looking into what kinds of people may be more jealous than others. And the literature is really interesting. So attachment style is kind of an obvious place to look. And as a reminder, there are three, some people add like disorganized attachment in here, but three general attachment types: anxious, secure, and avoidant. In anxious attachment style, you tend to be anxious. You tend to wonder what your partner is doing, whether they love you. You want to check in a lot. You want a lot of closeness and contact. With avoidant, you tend to avoid feelings of closeness or dependence. You can push the partner away. You can feel disconnected during sex. You basically, these people can sometimes sort of prevent themselves from diving fully into a relationship. And then in a secure attachment, you have confidence in your relationship in yourself. You want closeness. You're comfortable with closeness, but you're also comfortable with independence. And so, the healthiest relationships tend to be in that secure realm. And really interestingly, what research has found is that with secure attachment, they tend to have a higher threshold for when to get jealous. So they don't get jealous very easily. They tend to have like more self-esteem with regards to the relationship. They're more they're able to see, oh, this is just a friend, this is just a colleague, I trust my partner overall. They have higher levels of trust. But once that threshold has been reached, they can actually react with jealousy that is as strong as an anxious or avoidant style. And what's really interesting is that even though they react very strongly in jealousy, the way they react tends to actually bring them closer to their partner versus the other two styles, which can push the partner away. So I think that really speaks to the functional purpose of jealousy, which is to protect your relationship from usurpation, which I just like that word. So it actually is functional to be jealous to a certain kind of appropriate degree, because you do need to protect your relationship. You do, to a certain extent, need to look out for rivals or threats that could take your relationship away from you, because relationships are extremely important. But what they found for anxious and avoidant styles is that anxiously attached individuals tend to distance themselves and suppress their anger towards their partner. So they can get jealous more easily. The threshold is lower, but they'll suppress it, or they'll distance themselves because like the theory basically is that they're trying to prevent further feelings of rejection. They may be trying to prevent their partner from leaving them even though they're jealous. And so they won't be using kind of proper communication and boundaries with their partner. They'll just be feeling a lot of jealousy, and they'll be behaviorally jealous. So they might be reaching out a lot, checking in a lot, maybe sort of covertly trying to keep their partner from, having these other relationships. And then avoidantly attached people, interestingly, seem to not experience the jealousy or the anger as strongly, but they tend to act aggressively towards the rival as opposed to their partner, and they try to induce jealousy in their partner. And these are both behaviors that are probably going to push the partner away instead of bringing them closer. So even though they don't really feel as much anger or jealousy as the other two groups, they'll act on it in fairly unhealthy ways that might look angry and jealous.
Oh, that's interesting. For you, have you either, do you have forms of jealousy like this, or have you experienced that in jealous partners?
I've definitely had jealous partners. I've noticed since a very young age that I'm very low in jealousy, at least in romantic relationships. I think I can actually get slightly more jealous in friendships. But yeah, I'm a person who, I could probably watch my partner have sex with somebody else and enjoy it rather than be threatened by it. Let's see.
Why is that? I feel similarly, and I'm curious as to why, when you said, I feel more jealousy, I feel less jealousy than envy. I was like, oh yeah, I also don't identify myself as a jealous person. Why are your jealousy levels relatively low?
I don't know. I almost feel like it's a genetic thing because it's just so low to the point where I feel disconnected from people who do experience jealousy. One big 5 personality trait that is associated with romantic jealousy is low openness, and I am off the charts with openness in terms of high. I'm 99th percentile openness. So that might play in being more kind of open to different sexual experiences, my partner's different sexual experiences. I love hearing about my partner's past sexual experiences and past relationships. I love talking about that myself. So I mean, one mediating factor in jealousy in romantic relationships. So basically the model is the mediating factor is self-esteem. So when there is a threat or perceived threat to your relationship, your self-esteem plummets, and then that results in jealousy or jealous behavior. I think I have pretty high self-esteem when it comes to relationships. My self-esteem is lower when it comes to things like competence, which I've talked about many times. I've just never experienced other women as threatening to self-esteem necessarily. I'm very sensitive to cues of disrespect. So, like, if I've been lied to, manipulated, if my partner is intentionally trying to make me jealous, you know, I might be worried about how I look in front of other people. Although I think I'm still not all that sensitive to that, but that would get me more than the jealousy. I'm able to understand very clearly why somebody else would be attracted to another person and why they would feel tempted to go after that. And it's not to say that I wouldn't find that painful. I've been cheated on before and it sucked. It's just not... When I look back on the relationship where I was cheated on, I think much more about the disrespect than about the other woman.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, you know, I identify myself as someone who doesn't feel that much jealousy in romantic relationships. I agree with you. Sometimes in friendships, if there's like kind of an intentional, or maybe not intentional, but like a drawing away, I feel jealous. But with my romantic relationship, I remember feeling the most jealous with the person who's now my ex-husband when we were dating in college, because for a couple of reasons. I think the self-esteem thing is a key point. I was feeling like relationships really had a big part in terms of my value. Like if someone liked me, someone I'm chasing or someone I'm interested in liked me, that validated something, right? It validated my worth. It validated or like confirmed my attractiveness in some way, my desirability. So whenever he would flirt with other people, or there was one night where I went to visit him at his college, and I remember like sitting there with my suitcases, getting off of a 6-hour bus, and he wanted to hang out with his friends before I could drop off my bags, which was cool. And just watching, you know, they turn on music, and then these bunch of girls were just like dancing on him. Like he was sitting in the middle of the room getting like these kind of weird impromptu lap dances from these girls while I just sat there exhausted with my bags. And I remember feeling very jealous then because I felt like I really wanted his attention. I really wanted him, and it meant something to me to get that attention, and I wasn't getting it. And I had to compete for that. So back then I felt really jealous, but ever since that relationship, I really haven't felt that jealous, because I think after that relationship or that experience, I thought to myself, well, if someone is with me and wants to cheat on me, or they value other people, I don't want to be with them. Like, I think my self-esteem started to pick up after that. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not even a relationship I want to be in. If you want to go date other people, go do it. I would feel sad. I would feel more sad, and maybe angry, but I wouldn't want to do things to try to get that person back, right? Like, I wouldn't want to try to possess them, because I'm just like, suddenly the relationship and maybe that person is devalued in my eyes in that moment. So it is, as you said, disrespect is a little bit more, like I feel more angry and sad that someone would do that in front of other people, or make me, express their discontent in relationship that way. But I wouldn't like want to do behaviors to like try to enhance and maintain that relationship anymore, right?
I actually completely agree with that. I think I don't want to give the impression that I've never been jealous in a romantic relationship, because I definitely have. I just don't think it's been to a very high level. After I was cheated on, and again, it wasn't because I was cheated on, it was because I was cheated on in a truly sociopathic way. It was a huge shock to my system, but it did two really good things. One was that it taught me that not everybody's going to love me, even the people who say they do, and that I can survive that, and that it's not the end of the world if there is somebody who just sees me as subhuman. And then two, that I am going to go after men who are respectful and who don't toy with me endlessly. And I still dated a couple people who, were not instantly committed and who kind of dragged me along. But I would end those relationships certainly within 6 months, but usually much earlier. And so I feel like I have just been, I feel like my love life has actually been filled with like pretty good, solid men ever since that point. And so maybe one thing to look at is like, if you are highly jealous, are you drawn to men who make you feel insecure? Or is it more of an anxious attachment style you've got going on where no matter the man, you're going to be feeling these high levels of jealousy and anxiety? And I'll just add one other thing. I mean, I talked about how lower openness predicted higher romantic jealousy. The other two big 5 traits that predicted higher jealousy were higher neuroticism. That's pretty, straightforward. People who have greater negative emotion will tend to experience this negative emotion as well. And also people who have lower agreeableness. So openness, do you know, Kibby, if that's something that can be raised through practice? I would think it could be.
I mean, the way that the big 5 traits, that is a theory of personality that it's a little bit more trait-based, meaning that they don't think that it really changes over time that much. I mean, you could definitely enhance or decrease, but the trait theory is all about, like, who do you think, what's your temperament? Like, what are you like? But I definitely think that you can't, if you probably people have a baseline openness, right? Like, but I'm sure that's enhanced with different things. Like, I'm sure that's enhanced with like taking up, like doing perspective taking exercises, like thinking what it's like for other people, trying to learn and understand other ways of living. So I'm sure that it can be enhanced that way. But yeah, I think that would be hard to like change your baseline openness as a person.
Okay, so Kibby, how do you know, because we know that jealousy is technically a functional emotion, but it can also really wreak havoc in a relationship. So how do you know when jealousy is functional and healthy or when it goes too far?
Yeah, I haven't treated this myself in terms of a couple's relationship, but I have tried to treat this individually. So it's just fascinating because jealousy, it can be so reinforcing. Like, if someone's jealous, it's hard to disprove or hard to get rid of, right? Because they're like, oh, they still, the person, I know I don't have anything to worry about, but maybe there is something, right? So that you could always kind of seek the threat. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel like jealousy could actually drive the problem, right? If someone's really jealous and really acts on it in really relationship destroying ways, that other person might do things to pull away. So I found jealousy really interesting, but I found a really nice paper by De Silva and Marks from 2009 talking about jealousy in the clinical setting. And it was nice. They laid out some things to look out for and assess when you're trying to figure out, is this relationship being harmed by jealousy? So the first one is like the nature of jealousy. So really understanding, what doesn't the jealousy involve? Is it just this kind of feelings that are discussed, or is it like, does it lead to like spying, fighting, questioning, imposing restrictions on the partner's behavior, right? So really understanding like what the dynamics are with the jealousy in the relationship. Have you ever had that before? Have you ever had like
I
really
sure
intense.
have.
I was just trying to remember, as I'm reading through this, I'm trying to think, like, did I experience this? And, like, luckily not really, because if anyone tries to, like, restrict my behavior, I'm so into autonomy that I quickly get out of relationships that are very possessive.
Yeah. I tended to as well, but there have been, so one relationship was the one where I got cheated on. And so that was very clearly, narcissism and narcissistic insult. And so in one way he was very open and didn't restrict my behavior very much, but then he would like slam down, like just, it would kind of come out of nowhere. Like he went through my phone, and found interactions that I'd had with men before we were in an exclusive relationship and called me a whore and all this bullshit. But another relationship where it was more chronic was it was in a reaction. This person had been cheated on in the past by his first love, and so is very, very sensitive about infidelity in general. And then he'd had a series of relationships that he was not as attached to, and so he did not think of himself as a particularly jealous person. But because I am very high in openness, very high in extroversion, and I have a lot of male friends, and I'm also friends with my past sexual and romantic partners, it was very difficult for him to not feel threatened by my behavior and to not feel like thrown back into this first infidelity experience. And so it was just so much hurt over the way I would interact with other men, sometimes the clothes I would wear, a lot of like wanting me to repeat experiences that I'd had with other men with him.
How so? Wait, what does that mean?
Like if I'd let somebody photograph me in the past, then he would want to photograph me.
Or wow, okay.
Yeah.
So like want ownership over your other experiences.
Yeah. Huh. And lots of questions of like, you were willing to do this with this other partner, why not me?
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah. And so it made me crazy because I feel like I can't be natural anymore. I'm sort of hyper vigilant over what I'm wearing and who I'm talking to and how I'm talking to them. Really craving experiences outside of the relationship because I don't want to be criticized for experiences where I'm being observed. Vigilant about the stories that I share with him. I mean, all sorts of things. And I understand that if he'd had a different partner, none of this might have come up because a lot of other people think it's crazy to be friends with people you've had sex with in the past, or it's crazy to. I think I can come across as flirtatious when, for me, flirtation really just means like being charming and. It's just kind of how I interact. It's not like supposed to be overtly flirtatious, but. A lot of people would think it would be crazy to talk about past sexual experiences, and to me that's like interesting and fun. And so it was really, I think, a huge like interaction effect, and I think it was tanking his self-esteem. Like it was throwing him into the past way too much. His threat centers were all over the place. There was attachment stuff coming in, and so it was really damaging at the time.
Yeah. I mean, you're bringing up really two important parts of assessing whether jealousy is like morbid, like maladaptive. Like one is the distress caused by the jealousy for both people involved, right? Normally, actually, very often, like the people who come into therapy for this it's because the person who is the target of jealousy is like feels wrongly treated and helpless, and is kind of feels like nothing they do can satisfy it, right? They might restrict their behaviors, but they feel helpless. They can't actually make that person feel less jealous because it's kind of like reinforcing the more restrictions. It sometimes can feel like not, like a bottomless pit of jealousy. So.
I also felt like I was constantly hurting him and that I was making his life miserable, and that's a very hard place to be. Like, I'm not making you happy, I am hurting you, but it's just with who I am. I mean, I can change some of these behaviors, but I don't agree with changing them. It's not my style. So what are we going to do about this?
Yeah. And then, the distress that you felt and probably he felt, but also the disruption to the relationship in general, right? Like, often they talk about how jealousy can interrupt like sexual activity, right? Like sex is no longer free and fun and spontaneous. It might feel obligatory, or people might avoid it. And there's also threats of separation. Like, either party can just be like, if you talk to so-and-so, I'm out. Or the other person goes, I've had enough of you checking my emails or asking where I am late at night. Like, I'm out. So it could, if it gets in the, if you have all that dynamic and it's like sexy and exciting and it draws you two together, fine. But a lot of people who seek help for this and who, it affects their mental health are people who really feel distressed by it and feel like their relationship is threatened because of it.
Yeah. The other thing is that jealousy is linked with aggression.
Yeah.
And so, I think I sent you a statistic that like 40% of female homicides, meaning the female is the victim, were because of jealousy. Or something from conflict with relationship partners. I once had a partner. Again, we weren't in an exclusive relationship, and I was talking to some other people, went through my texts while I was out of town, and then made a permanent marker or frown on my beloved stuffed animal, and then wrote all over my room messages like, I hope everyone finds out how much of a cunt you are.
Oh my God.
Which
that's
felt abusive. Aggressive. I mean, it was... all over my room. I mean, it was very scary to walk into that. It felt violent, even though it was just words, and maybe it was property destruction. He wrote on books and stuff. Yeah.
Oh wow.
My beloved stuffed animal had this frown and was holding a sign that said "Fuck you, Jacqueline," and my name was spelled wrong.
Yeah. That's horrible. That's so horrible. Yeah, I think when we talk about any kind of relationship issues, mental health issues, and couples therapy, whenever you get into the category of aggression that becomes violent or becomes, like destroying property, or, when you get to that level of violence, it really changes the approach, right? We're going to give some tips in a minute about like what to do when, you have a jealous relationship. But when violence comes up, in couples therapy, that becomes the number one priority, because that really shifts the power dynamic, right? You're not two equals going to, working out a partnership together. It becomes one person, who is dominant and really like controlling of another person and really threatens their like basic safety. And that needs to be fixed right away. So so if it ever tips into the violent category, aggressive like that, that's stopping that is like number one, number one priority.
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell us about these tips.
Yeah, it's really cool. Actually, I love delving into this literature because you really get to see the nuance. Like I only approached it in my clinical work very simply, and then to really understand the nuances of jealousy and how to work on it I just love it so much. So one thing I learned is that you should also really assess the different kind of goals people have when they act on jealousy. So, if let's say a couple comes in, they have, there's a lot of jealousy. One person is like, oh, they don't like it when they hang out with their opposite sex boss, or, they don't like it when they hang out with their exes, and it's causing an issue. One thing to look at is there's a model that talks about 6 jealousy-related goals. So I'll just list them out. So these are the type of goals that people can maybe have when they act on jealousy. Number 1 is maintaining the primary relationship, right? You might feel jealous, but your goal is to bring you two closer together again. 2 is preserving self-esteem, right? Like kind of like the one I felt when my ex-husband, whatever, was flirting with other people. It's like, I want to feel good about myself again. 3 is reducing uncertainty about the primary relationship. Again, that was another one of my goals. Like, what are we? What's going on with us? They're flirting with other people. What does that mean? And I wanted to get some certainty. 4 is reducing uncertainty about the rival relationship, right? If they're hanging out with their opposite sex boss or whatever, what does that mean? and reassessing the relationship. You might be at a place where you're not sure what's going on and where you're headed. So the goal might be to think about, like, do I actually want to be in this? And 6 is restoring the equity through retaliation. I think that might be, I don't know, the research doesn't say that, but I think that might be, you know, one of the more insidious ones, because if you feel like this is like a power dynamic, you want, you know, and the person you're jealous of is like, you know, having like more power, you might want to get that power back. And I think that kind of like puts the relationship in kind of this like competition kind of mindset. But yeah, so those are the kind of goals that might show up when people feel jealous.
Okay, and then did the literature go into healthy ways to meet those goals and unhealthy ways to meet those goals?
Totally. So I think the relationship looked at how when people have these different goals, what kind of communication styles come out of it? Like, what do they do with those goals? And I think the healthiest goal is the number one, maintaining the primary relationship, right? It's like... That's just, you know, wanting to have a good relationship with the person you're with, and everything else kind of feels like a threat. So, and this kind of goes into tips. People who have that as the goal, they tend to use communication styles that are integrative communication, which means discussing the problem and negotiating relational rules, which means that you explain how you're feeling in a very non-judgmental and not aggressive way, but explain that you're feeling sad or jealous about what's going on. And then discussing with the partner about your limits and your expectations with fidelity or, you know, and apparently, even in couples therapy, that could be a major point of coming together. It's really understanding, like, what does cheating mean to you and what does cheating mean to me? And also, like, what is this relationship, right? What are the expectations? How do we feel about it? So, like, opening those kind of conversations. That's, like, number one.
Yeah, I think that's so important because people seem to just assume what the other person thinks cheating is. Like, they think it's obvious, but it's... actually incredibly not obvious. Like, everybody goes in with these kind of different levels. Like, is cuddling with a friend cheating? I used to be like, I'd be totally happy with a relationship where we can make out with other people, but that's it. Paul was not cool with that, so we
Well, what would cheating be for you? Like, if you're so high in the openness, especially in relationships, what would be your expectations about what cheating is and isn't?
I think I would be looking for fairness and communication. So, and also it would just depend on the relationship. Like with Paul, at this point, it would be really hard to imagine opening up the relationship to other partners. But we've also talked about, like, hey, that's what our relationship looks like now. What about in 10 years?
Right.
You know, we know so many people that start out hot and heavy and then things change once they have kids and, you know, they look different and they've just been together forever. So it was a great comfort to me, even if he didn't necessarily mean that, to say, you know, we will reassess periodically throughout the relationship where we're at and what would be good for the maintenance of our relationship.
Yeah.
So I think that actions that actually serve the maintenance of the relationship instead of threatening the relationship, to me, that's what's more important. And sometimes, like, having other partners or having certain interactions with certain romantic or sexual interactions with other people can serve to maintain the relationship. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, even talking about that, like, let's say you guys had a problem, even just discussing that and seeing how it matches up with his. And sometimes there has to be a compromise. Like, you know, sometimes it's not like one person is right and the other is wrong, which can get, you know, jealousy tainted conversations can get, like, you're wrong for doing this, but really respecting the two perspectives and expectations, saying, like, okay, what are we both comfortable with, right? Like, what are your deal breakers here? Yeah. And then one really major point that kept coming up in the literature is enhancing the primary relationship. This is, like, one of the first steps in a couple's therapy plan is assessing, like, how good is the relationship overall. I think jealousy will tend to, like any emotion, narrow your perspective on that one problem. Like, I'm mad at this partner because they were texting with a person I didn't know, and that's wrong. And so people can get really focused in on like that incident. But a good couples therapist, and maybe you could do this for your own relationship, it's really to take a step back and say, like, how is my relationship doing? Like, how is my sex? How is the time we have together? Do we share shared activities that we love, shared interests? What is it like when we discuss about other problems, right? And when people have the goal of maintaining the primary relationship, they might take that step back and then re-engage in those things, right? Like, do things together again that they used to love, spend quality time together, actually set a time and space for sex, or to re-engage in like new sexy time between the two, or date night or something like that. So not just spending all their time focusing on the jealousy, but like really enhancing the rest of the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty unimpeachable.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to think that that's something that's really a huge part of jealousy, and huge part of making jealousy become maladaptive is when that's like the focus of everything. And usually, there are other problems involved, right? They're usually the couple is disconnected in other ways. And, like a flirtation, extramarital affair, or even jealousy is kind of a result of like we're drifting apart, or we were not satisfied in other areas of our relationship. And that's to blame, right? Like the flirting is to blame, not like these deeper problems that we're not connecting on another level, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's how you would proceed also if there had been infidelity. Is you'd want, if you decide to stay together, you'd want to strengthen the relationship. So it makes sense to do that preemptively too.
Yeah. And the last tip I saw for couples therapy is the thing called timetabling, which is interesting. So especially if jealousy or jealous communications or, really takes over the relationship, like you're talking about it all the time. One strategy is to really set aside a really specific amount of time each day or each week to discuss those issues. So that's almost kind of like what we do for anxiety. It's like you pick an anxiety time where the rest of the time you're focusing on enhancing the relationship, but you set aside this really particular time to like let all the demons out, meaning that for half an hour a day, you can discuss the jealousy issues, ask the questions, really express the emotions. But outside of that is preserved for enhancing the relationship. So sometimes that, even just to assess whether someone can have boundaries over that, right? So whether that both people really respect that time and say, okay, I really want to check their phone and I really want to yell at them about this, but I'm gonna really focus on having a great date night, and then from that, in that half an hour, really bring up those issues. So at least like it kind of gives a little space so that the other person, like the target of jealousy, doesn't feel like they're on eggshells all the time, right?
Yeah. I would say from my experience, like one thing, so I'll just talk about Paul for a second. Like in general, one thing that he would do was he'd be bothered by something and then he'd bottle it up. And I think that can happen with jealousy a lot too. And in part maybe because you feel crazy or you're just like mad at the other person, but you don't know how to articulate it. And we developed a code word scheme of pineapple, where as soon as he felt hurt or slighted, he would just say that. And it was such a disarming word also that it was like, it kind of took the stinger out a little bit, and then we could address it right then and there. So I think it's important to figure out your conflict resolution style in general, because if, like, when he would bottle it up, I'd be sitting there for 3 days being like, what the fuck did I do? Like, what? I don't understand what's going on. I feel like disoriented. And so, you add jealousy to the mix, and then basically all that does is allow 72 hours to pass while you're festering in jealousy and like suspicions that aren't founded, or maybe they're founded. But so, for some people it's really good to take some space, but not if that's going to cause a whole bunch of confusion.
Yeah, that you're right. That is a pretty delicate balance of like not bottling up, but at least that's what the half an hour does. Like that's what the timetabling of that jealousy talk. It's like you might even consider that a check-in time, right? You don't have to call it like the jealousy time or whatever. You could just be like, this is the time where we really discuss like how we're feeling and what's going on in terms of that. But at least what it would do, at least like, you know, what it would do for Paul in that scenario is that it would try to have him focus on like, what do you want? What is your jealousy goal? If you're feeling jealous, what do you want out of it? Do you want to restore equity and just be like, I just want my power back? Or is it about, you know, getting closer with that person? And if that's the goal, then is bottling up feelings and drawing away in line with that? Or does it mean doing something fun together, right?
Right.
So I guess it kind of reorients the person to like outside of that time, really focus on maintaining the primary relationship, enhance the relationship if that's what you want. If other things is what you want, individual therapy is really, it's really the place to like suss that out, you know?
Yep. Okay, so Kibby, can you close us out with some resources?
Yeah. I think one of the best ones that we found is that if you're curious if you have a jealousy problem or if your loved ones have a jealousy problem, there's a nice questionnaire that we could post on a website. It's called the Self-Report Jealousy Questionnaire. It actually just lists out a bunch of different scenarios, and you rate it from a scale of like 0, meaning pleased, to 4, extremely upset, and how you would react in those situations. And then you just kind of add up all the add up all your scores and see how jealous you are, or you could do that in thinking of the other person in mind. And I think the best resource is always going to a couples therapist, and especially if any of these relationship tips that we gave don't work. Like, let's say you're trying to enhance the relationship, you're trying to timetable, you're trying to discuss the problem, and it's not really working. They do say that it's important for each individual party to have their own individual therapy around it, because there might be a lot of other issues coming up that don't really have to do with the current relationship. Often that's the case, but let's say the person, you know, they have this like self-esteem issue, right? Or restoring equity through retaliation goal, like they want to get power. Well, that person might have to go and get individual therapy to really, you know, like cognitive therapy strategies, trying to understand beliefs about what expectations they have, what are past experiences that are informing the way they see the current one, right? Like, I'm really getting an understanding of where this jealousy is coming from. And sometimes this is actually things that I've done with my individual with my individual clients when they felt a lot of jealousy, and it's not really about the relationship. Like, the relationship was healthy and faithful, but the person was just obsessed with this. We would do like a very behavioral exposure and response prevention where, let's say they, you know, for example, like one person would text their partner and then just get so jealous when that person didn't respond within an hour. Like the thoughts came up that were kind of obsessive, like, oh, they're cheating on me, they're doing something else, why are they responding, you know? And we would have to do very very behavioral, very structured, like, okay, you're going to text this person, and then you're just not going to do any of the compensatory behaviors that that person normally would do. So not going to text them 80 more times, calling them, texting them threatening things, right? Sometimes it would escalate to try to, you know, get their attention. So it's like, you know, so we would actually have to stop and really on purpose stop that behavior. No checking their social media, no checking their location, no trying to go into their emails from another, you know, right? So like stopping that behavior and just really sitting with and being aware and mindful of their feelings of jealousy. Maybe validate where it's coming from. Maybe it's like fears of the past or self-esteem issues, and just really like sit with those emotions on their own and work with them in the context of therapy. So yeah, so those are some options if people really, if they're not finding, you know, this is working. But another resource that I could offer is a really nice book just about It's not just about jealousy, but it's just about relationships in general. It's called Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love by Dr. Sue Johnson.
Aww.
You know, just like relationship enhancing and communication enhancing resources would be fantastic for really working on the greater overall health of the relationship.
Amazing. Well, Kibby, it's been lovely as always, and we will I think we're gonna do more episodes similar to this topic, perhaps an episode on envy, and certainly episodes about open relationships and polyamory in the future. So if this is on your mind, there will be more, and we will see all of you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.